Welcome back to The Right Idea, where we discuss the people, policy, and politics that move Texas. Flying solo today, but I am not alone. I am joined by James Quintero, the policy director for our Taxpayer Protection Project. James, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
I want to set up the stage a little bit here, because what we've been doing since we came back from RPT is talking to experts like you and reacting to some of the conversations and interviews that we had at RPT. Now, are you sitting down? Because I got a surprise for you. A lot of people have takes on property taxes.
Huh.
The property taxes are a bit high, as they would say. And so we felt that it would be good to get you to come onto the show, and we can hear some of the proposals, hear some of the ideas, and talk a little bit about how that would actually go into effect. And so we'd like to do that, but I want to actually bring back a segment that we had from the prior to the RPT shows with our hot take segment. Now, Brian used to always have a hot take ready, and it was usually like, what is Chaperone doing this week, or what have you. I have not done my Chaperone homework, but I want to ask you a literal hot take. It is 97 degrees as we record this, and it's going to get as high as, I think, 102 today. What are you doing in the heat? How does Mr. Quintero stay cool?
My wife and I have filled our house with children, so no matter how hot it is outside, I find yard work to do and things to do around the house. Now, usually what I'm a huge sucker for is ice cream. So any chance that I get to take my little gremlins to the ice cream shop and cool off with a bit of mint chocolate chip,
good call.
That's usually what I go for.
Excellent. Now, you said when you evoke children, I thought you were going to have them like a rotation fanning you with palm fronds or something. It's still on the table as well. So let's not swear it off. Another thing that I want to bring back that the ghost of Brian would beat me had he known is I forgot the shameless plug. So make sure you go to www.texaspolicy.com and sign up for the Post, where we break down everything that's coming out of TPPF, recent news, and other developments. All right, James, let's get back to discussing property taxes. So let's set the table. We have engaged in property taxes here at the foundation in various forms of relief and reform suggestions for at least as long as I've been here, and I'm guessing as long as you've been here, which I'm pretty sure we belonged to Spain at the time. But that being said, we just approved a $140,000 homestead exemption with nearly 80% of the vote. Seniors now up to $200,000, and we're spending somewhere around $51 billion on property tax for buying down the school rates. And yet, if you talk to any of these folks, whether it's the lawmakers or the constituents they're hearing from, I think that they're just going up lockstep. What's really going on in the realm of property taxes?
Yeah, let's get into it. And you're right, I have been here a long time. I celebrated 18 years this year, which is terrifying to think of. But it also gives you a little bit of a vantage point, or it gives me a little bit of a vantage point to have watched this issue develop over time and get to the place where I think major action is warranted from the state level down to the local level. There's a series of different reforms that I hope we get into that I think the legislature can enact to really quash some of the biggest problems here. But let's just go back through a little bit of legislative history, because I think it's informative. If we step back to 2019, just before COVID, what the legislature did is they reformed the property tax revenue limit, which previously allowed for as much as 8% annual levy growth. So, for example, your city year over year could increase their tax levy by as much as 8% before triggering a petition process that really put the onus on the individual to go out there, collect signatures, initiate a petition election, and then try to win that election to bring some measure of sanity back to the property tax process. What the ledge did in 2019 is they said, okay, look, that's an antiquated system that's been in place for almost 40 years. We're going to shelve that, and we're going to move to a newer, better system where they reduce the maximum annual tax levy increase from 8% to 3.5%. Now, put a star in that because there's some caveats, but they pushed it down to 3.5%. and then they replaced the petition election process with an automatic election trigger. So now local officials, I think, are a little bit more cautious about imposing major tax increases without voter approval, or they risk the wrath of the electorate, right? So you've got your tax revenue limitation in 19. Fast forward to 2023, the legislature put forward the largest tax cut in Texas history. It was an $18 billion tax relief package. So major item there. And then you also have a $10 billion tax cut in 2025. So those three things together really ought to have changed the environment in a major way. And yet, as you said, here we are. If you ask the average homeowner, hey, how are you feeling about taxes? I think most people would say anxious, overloaded, ready for change. And so that really brings to mind the question of why.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things we need to delineate here is the difference between relief and reform. I think we've established both, what I have said and what you have said has pretty well established that we have granted we can say a modicum of relief to the Texas taxpayer. However, the trick is when you're in a hole, you find yourself in a hole to stop digging eventually. And I think that's what people are coming around to. And I think people are starting to understand that the current structure where we actually allow the locals to spend like drunken sailors is no longer tenable. Now, I remember a quote that you were fond of sharing. It was from the Austin American Statesman. Remember this quote that I was thinking of?
Gretchen Gardner.
And what was the quote?
I would butcher it if I attempted to quote it verbatim, but effectively what had happened is this young lady had showed up to a property tax protest. I believe it was right around 2014, 2015. She was grumpy about taxes, and she wanted to voice her concern to the Austin American Statesman. And so this young lady, Gretchen Gardner, said something along the lines of, I have voted for every light rail system, every park, every library, everything the city has put forward, and now I can't afford to live here anymore. And for a long time,
it's not funny, but
it's not. It's actually, for me, it's attention grabbing, because what it signals is the fact that we have voters participating in the bond election process primarily who don't understand the connection between new debt and new taxes. Now, using that comment, we've been able to change the system a little bit. If you go to vote for various propositions now, what you'll see at the very top is, this is a tax increase. That disclosure statement now accompanies every proposition. But it's, we've still had a lot of people participating in the process who I think need more and better information so that they understand the fiscal consequences of their decision.
And I think that is the fundamental thesis of TPPF in our stance here is, we have ideas on the relief side, but no matter how many relief packages you put through, no matter how much the state pays in, and I'm just going to call it how I see it, you have fundamentally deceptive and dishonest practices going on at the local level. I remember we talk on this program quite frequently. I think it was Round Rock ISD when they had their bond election this last time through, or they had a Vader actually, because they had proposed a tax rate increase beyond the threshold that was permissible. And in doing so, they said, if you vote for this, your taxes will go down. Now, is that a true statement? Well, it's, logically dubious, but yes, if they vote for it, their taxes would go down. If they vote against it, it would go down further. And that was because they are jumping in and eating up that overage. And the funny thing is, this works as a ratchet. I've never seen an actual, an ISD start to wind down a budget. Now, some of them are going to have to, by hook or by crook. We see all this stuff going on in Austin ISD right now. But that's a whole story for a different time. But one of the things I want to say is, when we deal with state law, we have to basically work within a budget. We have to work within within certain parameters. And I want to point to a clip from Representative Vasut. And he, I think, hit the nail on the head when we started talking about local spending limits. First, let's go to the clip.
The state has a spending limit. We have a constitutional statutory spending caps. I think the locals ought to have the same thing. I was on city council, and we always tried to be under inflation and population growth. Were we perfect at it? No. But I think the standard ought to be inflation and population growth for your spending limit. And if you want to go over that, you can just get the voters' approval, right? Get the people to buy in on that. And that will ensure that
justify what the spending's
for, not just willy-nilly growing government. Look, you shouldn't just be spending and spending and spending. You need to live within your means. And yes, without spending, we wouldn't need taxes. Now, we have to spend on critical things for the government to work, keep us safe on the streets, but let's focus on that. I would love our local governments to do is to focus on those types of things as opposed to these, special interest projects like we see in Austin. Yeah. And I think a spending cap will force them to do that.
All right, James, local spending limit. What do we think about that?
Absolutely love it. If there's one thing the Texas legislature can do next session to improve the local public finance landscape, it's to impose a local spending limit. We absolutely need it. Now, there's a really interesting dynamic in Texas where the state and its finances are governed by no less than 5 different constitutional and statutory expenditure limits. And this covers everything from making sure that we have a balanced budget to making sure that our general revenue related appropriations don't grow too quickly to a debt limitation, right? So there's all these restraints that are imposed on state finances. When you go down to the local level, you have a property tax revenue limitation that has some holes in it. And you've got a 50-cent debt limit that governs school districts. Above and beyond that, there's not a whole heck of a lot, and certainly nothing on the expenditure side. So it's very clear to me that the legislature needs to enact something to control the growth of spending, because when you get spending under control, then you start to see some of these tax issues kind of naturally work themselves out.
Well, speaking on spending limits, though, I mean, we obviously, we live in and around Austin, so I think we see just like an absolute cartoon villain version of what profligate government spending would look like, or does look like, I should say. What is the problem with the priorities? I'm just going to ask you directly. What is the problem with the priorities of Austin City Council, where we're talking about, the artist in residence at the water department or whatever nonsense thing you can pull out of a hat? Why are they funding things like that and then saying cutting the funding for the police?
Yeah, what a great question. And I think there's so much there. We could probably spend the rest of the episode just on that question. Let me see if I can offer a short answer. If you think about the nature of local government and cities in particular, there's this progressive activism that has really taken root locally and has used a very loose fiscal environment to its advantage, not only to enact kooky left-wing ideas, but also to funnel money to nonprofits and other questionable causes in pursuit of political power, right? And I think part of that last bit of my answer will be fleshed out further. Later this year, we're going to release some information that looks at the nonprofit environment and how left-wing politicians are really misusing taxpayer dollars and diverting them to social justice causes through these various means and mechanisms, right? So, but all of that to say, you have a very we've paired in Texas. We've paired a local government environment with loose fiscal restraints and progressive politics. And then we're kind of standing back wondering, well, why are things going awry? I think it's somewhat self-evident. So in my mind, the institution of state-level restraints, right, the imposition of those restraints down to the local level is necessary not only to get our finances under control, but to make sure also that the progressive element is not running amok doing things like guaranteed income programs and climate change policies and DEI and everything that they want to borrow from the left coast. We need to make sure that they don't have the money and resources to get those things off the ground and let them take root in Texas, because that's not who we are.
Well, not only that, but I think you need to look no further than the last audit that, or at least public information that's coming out of the city of Austin, and all these nonprofits that are getting, some of which are politically active nonprofits, which I hope that somebody who has more investigative authority than I takes a look at. But essentially, one of the things that I think we're starting to hear is people are trying to get some creative ideas in how we're actually addressing what we feel is the property tax burden. I was able to talk to Representative Jeff Berry there, and he had a unique one.
I have this idea of being able to utilize a sales tax increase of up to 1% in cities and municipalities, but tie that money to buy down property taxes locally. I wish they would do that. If we would do that kind of thing, then the legislature wouldn't really have to deal with property taxes and work with property taxes, because locally what they could do is buy down their own property taxes in the way that we're currently doing it. We're buying down property taxes through our school tax, right? But we're reimbursing the schools from our sales tax.
The compression, exactly. It's what is it? It's like the old family circus cartoons where they're walking all around the neighborhood. It's like many different paths there.
But they all lead to this.
And so, for those of you who don't know, Representative Berry obviously has municipal leadership experience, and he proposed the sales tax swap. Essentially is what it, and we've looked at that before, but tell us a little bit about that and how that works.
Yeah, you know what I love about Representative Berry's comments, first and foremost, is that we all seem to have a shared goal, which is to eliminate the property tax. And I'll be forthright, there's a lot of different ways that I think we can get there, but we all seem to be walking in the same direction. That's very encouraging. I think we live in a very dynamic time where ambitious proposals like that are not only being considered, but acted upon. And I need only point to, last few sessions worth of tax rate compression and perhaps the further evolution of that idea where we're taking school taxes off the table. The other thing that I really like about his comments is that he's rightly interested in getting local governments involved in the tax relief process, because right now, so far, it's really been on state leaders to deliver some measure of tax relief.
And how much is the state property tax?
There is no state property tax. So, it's pretty interesting to watch the Texas legislature step into the gap every other year to try and get a handle on this problem while local governments run amok. I think we need a complete mindset shift at the local level where they're partnering with the state in some capacity to get those tax bills down. We haven't seen that yet, but I'm hopeful that maybe there's some legislation we can put into effect that kind of walks us in that direction. Now, to your question about the swap, when people talk about eliminating the property tax, there's generally two pathways that are usually referred to. One is an incremental approach, and one is a bit more comprehensive. In Representative Berry's case, it sounds like he's referring to more of a comprehensive swap where we're using the proceeds from a reformed sales tax to effectively eliminate the property tax in its entirety, right? So we're effectively adjusting the rate perhaps upward a little bit on the sales tax, and we're expanding out the number of items that are taxed to generate more revenue, but do so in a revenue neutral way, enough to replace the property tax and what it generates, right? And so that's usually what folks refer to when they're talking about the swap. The other incremental approach, and the one that we've seen really come to fruition over the last couple of years, is this idea that because the state's finances are so well managed, we have a tendency to generate a surplus, and that surplus is usually made available through the sales tax. And that's the state's primary revenue generator. And so what the legislature has done over the last several sessions is they've taken some percentage of that surplus and they've said, here, school districts, here's some extra money with which you can lower your tax rates. By the way, you don't have a choice. Lower your tax rates, right? We're going to make you whole with these surplus proceeds. And the long-term goal of that effort is to not only lower tax rates, but get them down to zero and keep them there in perpetuity. And perhaps some future evolution of that plan will see ISD M&O tax rates eliminated, and then the legislature can shift and we can start looking at city taxes and county taxes and special district taxes, right? There's other things that can be done once we've achieved that goal. And so, at the end of the day, both of these pathways really seek to achieve the elimination of property tax just through different means and mechanisms.
My one concern, and I brought this up with Representative Berry as well, is living in Pearland, I probably wouldn't mind, or I probably trust the individuals to rightly implement this. I don't trust the people, the council members of the city of Austin further than I can throw them, and I got bad hips. But that being said, is this something that, again, we keep coming back to the same fundamental premise that if we were angels, we would need no government, as Medicine said. But like if we had our spending under control, we wouldn't need tax reform and relief. So that just really kind of sticks in the craw, because no matter how we get there, and I think we can all agree that we get there, we need to the spending needs to get addressed. Now, another interesting idea that we discussed, and this is part of our conversation with Representative Vasut, and this came from him opining on the governor's plan, such as he's laid it out, and because I think we're going to be talking a lot about the governor's plan here, in this next legislative session, because of how ambitious it is. But basically, he had an idea. You know how when we're getting lied to by our school districts, Round Rock ISD, for example, saying that if we vote to increase our tax rate, our taxes will go down. He says, well, if you can vote to increase your tax rate, how about we vote to cut the tax rate? We have a clip on this.
My favorite piece, which is so aggressive, is if we can have referendums to increase taxes, we should have initiatives and referendums to decrease taxes. And that's one of the things that the governor's pitching is a tax cut election, where people can go to the polls and actually request a tax cut. And, I guess it kind of sounds crazy, but here's Texas. We're leading on these issues, and we're going to be innovative with our legislation. Is that something you'd consider as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that at the local level, especially, and particularly with our cities, I mean, the people are king. We're not a direct democracy, but we do have a lot more citizen participation at the local level with referendum and recall and things of that nature. So I think ideas like that certainly fit within the model of what's there right now.
And so, essentially, I mean, that's pretty plain and easy to understand. What do you think about this idea?
Absolutely love it. I love this idea.
Pushing on an open door here, am I?
That's exactly right. Let me just articulate a bit more why I think it's necessary. So when you consider the local government landscape, your cities, your counties, your school districts, really they have a lot of different avenues to take a tax increase question to the public, right? And that might manifest as a bond election or a tax ratification election or a voter approval tax rate election. You have, in some cases, elections over certificates of obligation or tax reauthorization elections, right? All of these have the net effect of raising your taxes if and when voters approve. And so you think about the other side. Well, what do voters have to really ease the burden of government at the ballot box? And really the only thing that I can come up with is electing the right people. Now, that ought to be, in a perfect world, that ought to be...
Are the right people in the room with us right now?
I think one of the great big advantages that progressives have in Texas is that they've weaponized tax dollars against the public to build this infrastructure that pulls local elected officials in a leftward direction. What I mean, I'm talking about, when a newly elected representative goes to City Hall or to their school board or to their county commissioner court, they are immediately met with left-wing propaganda from the Texas Association of Counties or the Texas Association of School Boards or the Texas Municipal League, right? They're almost immediately inundated with ideas and proposals and conventions that slowly drag them in a leftward direction, right? And so that's why I think a big reason why just electing the right people doesn't work, and it hasn't worked to date. And so in that environment, I think it is all well and appropriate that the legislature afford the electorate the ability to directly challenge the tax environment and call for lower taxes. Now, how might this work? Well, I've kind of mapped this out a little bit, and I hope to have a paper out eventually on this idea. But in short, really what I think the legislature ought to prescribe is the ability to petition for an election for a set rate decrease in the forthcoming year, meaning if somebody wants to go out there and gather signatures for, let's say, a 3-cent tax rate decrease for the city and the county, so a 6-cent rate decrease together, and they get enough signatures and they hold an election on it and they're successful, then in the next fiscal year, your city and your county, they've got to figure it out, and they got to come to understand how to make that work, because that's what the public wants. Right. And I think like how Chairman Vasut put it is right on target. The public is king. And when they want lower taxes, then I'm sorry, local government, you got to figure it out.
Yeah, heavy as the crown, as they say. One of the things I want to point out about that, though, is because I think you're exactly right. And I think it's also, engaging with the tax and spend lefty types kind of in their own game. I don't know about you, but on Twitter or X as they call it nowadays, you still hear a lot about threats to our democracy, this our democracy, that our democracy. Of course, I'm sure that these people were all upstanding social sciences scholars in schools, but we can put that aside. Is essentially this is direct plebiscite, right? This is going right to the voter and saying, and I assume there'd be a petition process to initiate it, saying, do you feel your taxes are too high? Let me slide a different number across the table. And if you would like to pay less taxes, you vote for this number. If you like the status quo, you can keep this. And then basically empowering them to do so. Now, if I can give you any pointers on this particular legislative approach, I'd put we'll say it'd be the next fiscal year, but I'd put a 2 fiscal year cool down on it. Not saying that they can't petition for a lower one in 2 years, but that there can't be punitive or recompensatory raises in the next 2 years.
I love it. And by the way,
I love when you yes and. Yeah, go ahead.
I think should this proposal advance in the legislature next session, it will find an electorate that is primed and ready for it. And I say that because we just got some polling data back where the question was posed. Some people say property taxes are a major burden for them and their family. Do you agree or disagree? 85% of respondents said yes, they are a major burden for me and my family. That's the highest polling result we've gotten back from asking that same question for the last, I believe, 5 to 7 years. So people are ready for tax relief and the ability to call for tax relief. And I think that resting that with the individual voter is the way to do that. And I like some of the horror stories, quote unquote, that we've heard, by people saying, "Oh, this will be horrible. People will vote themselves out of a government." And I was like, "Oh, what was it from Spider-Man?" It's like you don't have to sell me. I've already bought it. So, but all that being said, is I think that's good by showing where there are some tools that are being discussed and some tools that are going to be hopefully forthcoming to relieve the taxpayer. But another thing that we have worked on in the past, and that we have also, I would say,
supported not only here, but when it was former House member Dustin Burrows, I guess technically still a House member, but now Speaker Dustin Burrows. One of the issues that he did was the Death Star bill. We also talked to Chairman Vasut about that. Let's go to the clip real quick.
Because this will carry over into next session in some way. But chief among them is looking at the Regulatory Consistency Act about, we had a hearing last week on it. There's questions about making sure that it's enforceable and enforceable quickly, and that we're giving clarity to all involved. Business, chief among them, right? The whole point of the Texas Regulatory Consistency Act is that we have predictable regulations statewide for businesses, but also clarity for our cities and our counties. Really, the home rule cities are the ones impacted, that they know what is and is not on the table.
That's right.
Right? And so making sure that we have that clarity and quickly is important for everybody.
Spend.
And you're using the more formal name, Texas Regulatory Consistency Act, which is all the nerds that watch this show will know it more affectionately as the Death Star bill.
Yes, that is a common parlance of it. And of course, anytime a regulation comes up where maybe a left-wing city is trying to grow government, we get the picture of the Death Star coming out over from Rogue One.
I think it was first put out there, or at least embraced by the speaker, so I think we're all safe using that.
Certainly.
using that moniker. But it is the issue there is, and you're right, absolutely, on making sure that the whole point of it is so that the businesses can understand the consistency of the regulations from county to county and all of that. But one of the big issues has been that just the cities either didn't care that you all passed that bill and just said, hey, if they're going to come enforce it, we'll just sit around and wait for them to do that.
I was going to say, don't threaten you with a good time, huh? Yeah. So the Death Star bill, as it was called such, also known as the No Water Breaks bill, or I'm sure there's also a whole bunch of great names for it on the left too. Basically, explain to us what that did, and we'll go from there.
So when this was passed in 2023, I thought at that time, and I still do, that it was the nation's most ambitious field preemption measure ever passed, right? And what the law does basically is it identifies 8 sections of code, of state code, and it tells cities and counties, hey, if you're regulating in a space that fits within these codes, then there's some upper bound as to how much you can regulate, right? And the upper bound is what state law says, right? You can regulate less than that, but the upper bound is what state law says. And there's this kind of unspoken thought that where the state is silent in those various sections of code, it has spoken through its silence. Therefore, you, cities and counties, may not regulate in that space whatsoever. Now, as you can imagine, when this law was passed, again in 2023, activist governments lost their mind immediately. And they sued the state, alleging that the law was unconstitutional. It took a minute for that law to work its way through the courts. I believe in July of last year, I believe it was the third court of appeals affirmed its constitutionality, which should have supercharged our regulatory right-sizing effort, but thus far it has not, right? You don't see cities and counties going through their regulations and trimming them down or eliminating them or really modifying them in any way. What they're doing is they're instead waiting for someone in their jurisdiction to utilize the private cause of action to take them to court and go through all the rigmarole before they eliminate or adjust that one regulation, right? So there's no proactive movement on the part of cities and counties to actually get it right. They're just waiting around for courts to finally force it. And so, what Chairman Vasut was referring to in the clip is that the House had a hearing last month to really look at, well, what has been accomplished by this law and where do we go from here? And one of the things that I think hopefully came across is that the state has an interest in making sure that cities and counties are faithfully implementing the legislation that the legislature passes. And to make that happen, one of the things that the next ledge will hopefully do is empower the Texas Attorney General to begin effectively taking enforcement actions against cities and counties that are not complying with the law, right? We need to put some tools in the hands of the AG to make sure that, we're not just sitting around waiting for folks to get sued before we actually comply with the spirit of the law. No, we're actually doing our best to move forward with those things. And so I think the next legislature is going to take action on that issue. And if and when they do, what you're going to see is, I think, a greatly reduced regulatory burden all around the state. By the way, if that doesn't happen, one of the things that I love about the foundation is we've married policy and litigation, right? One goes hand in hand with the other. And our litigation team is pursuing an alternative pathway where we are first suing the city of Dallas over 83 quote unquote endangered regulations that it itself identified back in 2023. And we are saying, you know what, Dallas, we take you at your word. In 2023, you said these regulations would go away. We now want to see them go away. Yeah. And they're, of course, contesting us in court. I believe the ultimate goal there is to get that case up to the Texas Supreme Court. And if the court provides a favorable ruling, what we can do is accelerate the implementation of the Death Star bill, because if it's illegal in Dallas, then it ought to be illegal everywhere else. And so some really exciting developments between the policy world and the litigation sphere.
Well, I know that the counterpoint to that is, well, it was good, but these home rule cities basically, we're sitting here and talk. I mean, they don't have enumerated powers. They basically have everything that they haven't been expressly told they can't do, right? So is there also any appetite for, when the legislature comes back in and when we address the enforceability of the Texas Regulatory Consistency Act, is there any appetite to expand the field preemption?
Absolutely. And in fact, one of the things that I communicated to the committee last month was we need to revisit a proposal from the prior session, which called for expanding out that initial footprint to the criminal and election codes, and perhaps throw in some others as well, maybe in the housing sphere, to really rein in what cities and counties can do and what they ought not be doing, right? I think, as conservatives, we're not libertarians. We do believe there is an appropriate role for government, whether it's at the federal, state, or local level.
Ordered liberally, yes.
Yeah, but very clearly there's spaces that government either ought not be involved or have a very light footprint. And one of the really, I think, exciting things about this Death Star conversation is we're starting to move things in the direction of either stop it or lighten the load. And so we're going to get there. It's just taking us a little bit longer than it ought to. But eventually, I suspect we're going to be in a place where we've fundamentally broken the progressive machine at the local level, and we're having public resources actually directed to the things that we all agree we need, like roads, fire, police, etc.
Well, I'd say if you were a libertarian, you would not say that needed to be directed towards government spending does not need to be directed towards roads. So, James, I'm hoping that we actually get to the place where, we actually see tax bills coming down instead of actually growing, just slower. Mm-hmm. And I think that, I'll have to borrow a turn of phrase. If you said earlier that, the Death Star bill was the most ambitious piece of field preemption in the country, perhaps, to borrow a phrase from Andrew Brown, we can make it more ambitious, sir. So I believe that's a correct turn of phrase. But James, really appreciate you being here. Folks, you can find all of James' work at www.texaspolicy.com. And as the great Sam Houston says, do good and risk the consequences. We'll see you next time.